No One Walks Alone, the story of Elijah Brooks. Have you ever watched someone walk through life in silence and wondered about the weight they carry? At Crestmont High, no one really wondered about Elijah Brooks. He was just the quiet kid in the frayed hoodie and torn sneakers, always keeping his head down and moving like a ghost through crowded hallways. To most students, Elijah was just another face, another loser, someone you could mock or ignore without consequence. But behind his still eyes was a fighter, a boy who had sacrificed everything to raise his little sister, Ava, after their parents were killed in a tragic car accident. No one at Crestmont knew that Elijah was working late-night shifts to afford Ava's asthma medication, or that every insult he absorbed was a battle he chose not to fight, because he couldn't afford to lose. When Mason Grant, the school's golden boy, and his crew stole the last of Elijah's hard-earned savings, they had no idea they were lighting a fuse. And then, one day, someone else saw what others didn't. That someone was Damian Cole, a world-famous action movie star filming in town. He saw past Elijah's silence. And from that moment, Elijah Brooks was no longer fighting alone. Chapter 1. The Ghost in the Hallways. Elijah stepped through the rusting gates of Crestmont High, with shoulders hunched beneath a faded gray hoodie. His jeans were torn at the knees, his shoes barely holding together. Every morning felt like a mountain, and each step he took was under the weight of a life too heavy for a 16-year-old. He moved through the halls unnoticed, or worse, noticed only for mockery. Whispers followed him like shadows. Slaps on the back, sarcastic greetings, cruel laughter. At the heart of it all was Mason Grant, son of the town's wealthiest businessman, always dressed in designer brands, with perfectly gelled hair and a smirk that rarely left his face. His entourage, Trey Dalton, sly and two-faced, and Jace Miller, who laughed at pain like it was sport, flanked him like wolves. For them, Elijah was easy prey. He never fought back. He never spoke up. But Elijah wasn't quiet because he was weak. He was quiet because he was tired. His life didn't allow for hallway battles or teenage drama. His war was at home, keeping Ava alive, safe, and fed. Every dollar he made from washing dishes at Rosa's Diner went into Ava's medication. Every hour he wasn't at school was spent working or helping her with homework. He couldn't afford pride. He couldn't afford to crack. Chapter 2. The Tray, the Wallet, the Silence. That day at lunch, Elijah sat alone, as always, in the far corner of the cafeteria. His lunch, a peanut butter sandwich and a small milk carton, sat untouched. It wasn't much, but it was what he could afford. Mason strolled over with his crew, voice loud enough for the whole room. "Hey, look at this gourmet spread," he sneered. "Your mom too busy dumpster diving to pack you something decent." The room fell into awkward silence. Everyone knew Elijah's mom had died years ago. Jace laughed loud and obnoxiously. Trey clutched his stomach in mock amusement. Elijah said nothing. Mason hated that silence. He thrived on reactions. So he struck. With a flick of his wrist, he sent Elijah's tray flying. The sandwich landed in pieces. Milk splashed across Elijah's jeans. Laughter erupted. But Elijah just bent down and began picking up the bread, his hands shaking but steady. That afternoon, when Elijah opened his locker, he found his wallet ripped apart and empty. Every cent he had saved for Ava's medicine was gone. Taped to the locker was a note. "Thanks for lunch, loser." Elijah stared at the note, then quietly folded it, shoved it in his pocket, and closed the locker. He didn't go looking for Mason. He didn't scream or cry, because he couldn't afford to. Chapter 3. The Watcher in the Hallway. What Elijah didn't know was that someone had been watching. Damian Cole, action hero, movie star, and secretly in town filming a charity film, had seen it all. From the insults to the milk carton incident. From the stolen money to the way Elijah simply endured. He had seen men break under less. But Elijah didn't break. Damian followed Elijah after school, staying back just far enough. Elijah didn't take the main roads. He ducked through alleys, past condemned buildings and broken fences, until he reached a tiny house sagging at the edge of town. Damian watched as a little girl ran out the door and leapt into Elijah's arms. He saw Elijah's face soften for the first time all day. He saw love. Real, selfless, protective love. And Damien knew this boy wasn't weak. He was a warrior. Chapter 4. Mason's Legacy. Mason Grant wasn't just cruel, he was trained to be. His father, Charles Grant, was the most powerful man in Crestmont. The same man who had covered up the accident that killed Elijah and Ava's parents, paying off cops, judges, and witnesses. And Mason was walking in his father's footsteps. But Damien Cole wasn't a man to watch injustice unfold. He started digging. Within days, he uncovered everything. The covered-up DUI, the bribed officials, the threats made to Elijah's extended family to keep them quiet. He also uncovered Mason's school records, full of unpunished violence, all wiped clean by his father's influence. Damien knew the town wouldn't change unless someone exposed the rot at its core. Chapter 5. A New Kind of Fight. Back at school, Mason struck again. This time he stomped on Elijah's shoe, ripping the sole off in front of a crowd. Elijah stood barefoot, humiliated. But this time, Damien stepped forward. He found Mason in the cafeteria, leaned in close, and said in a voice like steel, "Touch Elijah again, and I'll show you what a real fight looks like." Mason froze. For the first time, he felt fear. Chapter 6. The Gift on the Porch. That night, after Elijah put Ava to sleep and stared blankly at the shelves of her nearly empty medication bottles, he heard a sound on the porch. When he opened the door, there was a box. Inside, a brand new pair of shoes, simple but sturdy, and a note. No one fights alone. Elijah sat on the porch, tears quietly falling as he laced them up. Across the street, Damien Cole watched from his Jeep. He didn't need Elijah to know it was from him. That wasn't the point. The point was hope. Chapter 7. Breaking the Cycle. The next day, Elijah walked through Crestmont wearing the new shoes. Head still down, but something was different. Lighter. Stronger. Mason noticed. And for the first time, he didn't feel in control. Later that week, Mason followed Elijah home, alone. He saw Ava. He saw the house. He saw the truth. And it shattered him. That night, when Ava had an asthma attack and Elijah was at work, Mason and Damien got her to the hospital in time. Mason carried her himself, whispering, "You're going to be okay." When Elijah arrived and saw Mason holding Ava's hand, his first instinct was confusion. Then Mason looked up, eyes tired and sincere, and said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. From now on, you're not doing this alone." Chapter 8. Exposing the Truth. Charles Grant soon learned about Mason's betrayal and exploded. He threatened Damien's career, but Damien came prepared. He handed over a USB full of evidence. The cover-up, the bribes, the threats. "I don't want money," Damien said. "I want justice." The videos went viral. Investigations followed. Charles Grant lost everything: his company, his reputation, and his freedom. Mason, finally free of his father's shadow, showed up at Elijah's door. He handed Elijah a new backpack. Inside was the exact amount they had stolen. "I owe you," he said simply. Elijah didn't say anything, but he didn't shut the door either. Chapter 9. Rebuilding. Mason, Trey, and Jace came back the next day, this time with tools. Under Damien's supervision, they helped repair Elijah's home. They fixed the roof, repainted the walls, reinforced the porch. They worked quietly, humbly, blisters forming on their soft hands. And slowly, the ice between them and Elijah began to melt. Chapter 10. The Community Awakens. As word of Elijah and Ava's story spread, the town responded. Miss Evans, the literature teacher, offered Elijah a scholarship for him. "You've earned a chance," she said. Other students began leaving gifts, books, clothes, toys for Ava. For the first time, Elijah felt Crestmont wasn't just a place where he survived. It was becoming a place he could belong. Chapter 11. A New Beginning. One snowy afternoon, Elijah received a letter. "Congratulations. Full scholarship. Mechanical engineering program." He stared at the words, barely believing them. Ava cheered and hugged him tightly. That evening, Damien showed up with hot cocoa. They sat on the porch, watching the snow fall. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting, Damien said. It's about freeing yourself to move forward. And Elijah understood. Epilogue. No one walks alone. Weeks later, Elijah, Mason, Trey, and Jace built a snowman in front of the house. Ava ran in circles around them, laughing freely. No one talked about the past. They just lived in the present, together. From the window, Damien watched with quiet pride. The town had changed, not because of noise, but because someone dared to see the silent ones. Elijah Brooks didn't walk alone anymore, and neither should anyone.